When the Roman legions marched upon a city, everyone knew the fate of the men. Quick death, brutal, but predictable. But the women? What happened to them was something that not even the Roman historians themselves dared to fully record. Something so systematic, so calculated, so devastating, that it forever changed the social structure of entire civilizations. Today, you're going to discover historical records that most people have never seen, hidden accounts in ancient documents, practices that Rome preferred to keep in the shadows, and the truth behind the greatest military machine in history. A truth that will make you rethink everything you know about the Roman Empire. But first, if you think making a video like this is easy, you have no idea. Weeks of historical research, dozens of verified sources, extreme care to bring the truth without cheap sensationalism. If you value this kind of serious and in-depth content, leave your like now. It shows me that it's worth continuing to investigate the dark sides of history that nobody has the courage to tell. And stay until the end, because what you're going to discover in the last 5 minutes will leave you speechless. Rome, the name that for centuries made emperors tremble, entire nations bow, millennial civilizations disappear from the map. Between 264 BC and 180 AD, Rome conquered practically the entire known world, more than 5 million square kilometers, tens of millions of subjugated people. And here's something you need to understand right away. Rome didn't conquer territories. Rome devoured civilizations. The logic was simple and brutal. Each conquest needed to serve as an example, a bloody warning for the next target. And in this system of calculated terror, there was one element that Roman generals exploited with frightening efficiency: the fear of what would happen to the women. You see, for an elite Roman, conquered peoples weren't just defeated enemies. They were considered barbarians, subhumans, inferior beings who needed to be civilized by force. And in the Roman mentality, this included a disturbing concept. The women of the defeated were seen as living spoils. Think about that for a second. Not jewels, not gold, not lands, people. Women were literally cataloged, evaluated, and distributed as if they were merchandise. And here's the first shocking detail you need to know, something that forever changed my perception of Rome when I discovered it. There was an unwritten military code, passed from generation to generation among Roman officers, that determined exactly what should happen to women in the first 72 hours after a conquest. A protocol, a system, a machine of psychological domination. But before revealing that, you need to understand the complete context. Imagine the scene. You're a woman living in a prosperous city in the 1st century BC, maybe in Gaul, or in Hispania, or in Greece. You have a life, a family, dreams. Your city has fortified walls, trained warriors. You believe you can resist, and then you hear it. The sound that freezes the blood of anyone from that era. A sound that traveled kilometers before the legions themselves. The synchronized rhythm of thousands of military sandals hitting the ground. The metallic noise of armor moving in perfect formation. And above all, the deadly silence of the soldiers. Romans didn't shout, didn't provoke. They just advanced. Historians like Livy and Polybius describe this moment with disturbing details. The cities knew. Everyone knew. Once Rome decided to conquer, there was no negotiation, no honorable surrender. There was only the after. And here's something most people don't understand about Roman military strategy. Rome's true power wasn't in brute force. It was in anticipated psychological terror. You know why so many cities surrendered without fighting? It wasn't cowardice. It was because the rumors of what happened to cities that resisted were so horrible, so specific, so detailed, that surrender seemed the only rational choice. And those rumors? They were true. All of them. When Rome finally broke through the walls, and it always did, what the Romans called purification began. 3 days, 72 hours, where everything was allowed to the soldiers. Plutarch, a Greek historian who lived during the Roman Empire, wrote something that made me stop for several minutes when I first read it. He said, and I'll quote carefully, "In Roman conquests, the first victory was over the men. The second, slower and crueler, was over the spirit of the women." Think about the weight of that phrase. The entry of soldiers was systematic. First, they separated everyone by gender and age. Men to the left, women to the right, children in the center. The men who resisted, publicly executed. Those who surrendered, enslaved or executed too, depending on the commander's generosity. But the women, here began something much more calculated. Roman officers didn't see women as just prisoners. They were tools, instruments of a larger strategy. And this strategy had 3 specific objectives. Objectives documented in Roman military manuals that have survived to this day. Objectives so cold, so pragmatic, that when you discover them, you'll understand why Rome dominated the world for so long. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Now comes the most difficult part of this video. The part that required the most care in research, most sensitivity in presenting, and most courage to simply tell the truth. What happened to conquered women wasn't chaotic. It wasn't the result of uncontrolled soldiers. It was systematic, planned, an official part of Roman military doctrine. And here's the first objective I mentioned before: breaking the social structure of the enemy. Rome knew that every society was organized around family structures, marriages, lineages, inheritances. If you destroyed that, you destroyed the very identity of a people. And how did Rome do this? By forcing permanent changes in these structures. Women from noble families, wives of leaders, daughters of wealthy merchants were specifically separated, marked, and subjected to functions that disconnected them forever from their previous lives. Josephus, a Jewish historian who witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, wrote detailed accounts. He describes how women from the Jewish elite were forced to serve Roman officers in capacities that deliberately prevented them from returning to their previous social positions. Some were forced to participate in Roman religious ceremonies, a sacrilege for Jews and many other peoples. Others were assigned to intimate functions in military camps, functions they would never have chosen, that violated all the codes of their cultures. The objective wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. It was to make them become incompatible with their own societies. Second objective, demonstration of total power. Here's something disturbing. Many of these humiliations were public, not hidden. The Romans made sure everyone saw. Why? Because when the conquered population saw their own leaders, women who were previously untouchable, respected, powerful, being forced to bow before Roman officers, something broke psychologically. The message was clear. Nobody is safe. Nobody is above Rome. Tacitus, one of the greatest Roman historians, described these ceremonies with a coldness that still shocks today. He speaks of obedience tests, public proofs where conquered women needed to demonstrate total submission to new masters. And here's a detail that made me pause the research for days. There are archaeological records, chains, collars, metal rings found at battle sites with inscriptions. Inscriptions in Latin that said things like property of the ex-legion or spoil of officer's name. These objects were placed on conquered women, physical marks, permanent symbols of ownership. But the third objective, the third is what really reveals the Roman mentality. Third objective, profitability. For Rome, war was a business, and conquered women were valuable merchandise. The slave markets of the Roman Empire moved astronomical fortunes, and young women from conquered lands, they were the most sought-after products. Pliny the Elder wrote about prices. A healthy woman from a conquered city could be worth between 500 and 2,000 denarii, the equivalent of 1 to 4 years' salary of a common soldier. Women with education, who spoke Greek, who knew how to read and write, could be worth 10 times more. And here's the most calculated part. Roman officers had the right to a percentage of this profit. Conquering wasn't just military duty. It was financial investment. But there's something even more disturbing I need to tell you. Something that modern historians debate to this day because the records are fragmented, controversial, difficult to fully verify. There are references to a system called matrimonium hostis, forced marriages with enemies, a practice where women from conquered peoples were legally married to Roman officers, not for love, not by choice, but as a way to consolidate domination. These marriages served multiple purposes. They created mixed-race heirs that diluted local identities, transferred properties to Roman hands, and created legal ties that made future resistance almost impossible. And the most shocking part? This was seen as an honor, a chance for civilization. In the Roman mentality, they weren't committing atrocities. They were elevating barbarian peoples to the Roman level. But what happened when women resisted, when they refused to accept this new destiny? Here, Rome showed its true face. Because if the integration system was calculated, the punishment system was absolutely brutal. Suetonius, biographer of Roman emperors, documented specific punishment methods for women who challenged Roman authority. And these methods were purposefully chosen to be public examples. Exemplary punishments. That was the official expression. A woman who tried to escape, she wasn't simply executed. She was brought to the center of the military camp, and there, in front of all the other prisoners, she was subjected to punishments that served as a lesson. Appian of Alexandria, a Greek historian, described a specific scene after the conquest of Carthage. Women who tried to hide were found and taken to the main square. There, they were forced to watch the complete destruction of their temples, their homes, everything they knew, while being marked with hot iron. The mark of the empire, a Roman symbol burned into the skin, usually on the shoulder or back, that permanently identified that person as Roman property. And there's an important thing you need to understand about these marks. They weren't just symbols of ownership. They were permanent social blocks. A marked woman could never return to her previous life, would never be accepted in traditional marriages, would never recover social status. It was a social death. Worse than physical death, because you remained alive to carry the humiliation. But Rome had another, even more perverse system. The female prisons inside military camps. When a legion conquered territory, they established fortified camps. And inside these camps, there were specific sections for female prisoners. Polybius mentions these structures in his writings. He describes them as containment rooms, where women stayed in groups, constantly watched, waiting. Distribution. Distribution for what? Here's the raw truth. These women were kept as reserves. Some would be sold at the next market. Others would be sent to forced labor in mines or farms. Others would be assigned to functions within the army itself. And there was a hierarchy in this. The youngest, the healthiest, those considered most valuable, had specific destinies, often sent to Rome, to patrician houses, where they would serve as domestic slaves, a term that in practice meant total submission. But here's the detail that most disturbed me in the research. There are letters, correspondence between Roman officers and their wives in Rome. And in these letters, they discuss the acquisition of conquered women as if they were buying furniture. I'm sending 3 women from Germania, 1 for the kitchen, 2 for supervising the children. I got an educated Greek woman. She knows mathematics. Use her to teach our son. People reduced to lines in commercial letters. And here, Rome revealed its dark genius. They didn't just destroy civilizations, they absorbed them. They took what was valuable, knowledge, culture, people, and incorporated it into the empire. Conquered women weren't just victims, they were resources.
Until now, I've talked about systems, strategies, numbers. But the real story is in the people. And there are records, specific stories, women whose names, lives, and destinies were documented. Let me tell you about some of them. Carthage, 146 BC. For centuries, Carthage was Rome's rival, a maritime power that threatened Rome's very existence. And when Rome finally destroyed it, it was absolute. Appian recorded that more than 50,000 Carthaginian women were captured after the final siege. 50,000. Among them, there was a woman mentioned in fragments of ancient texts. Modern historians call her Sophonisba. It probably wasn't her real name, but that's how we know her. Sophonisba was the wife of a Carthaginian general, educated, spoke multiple languages. When Carthage fell, she tried to negotiate surrender for the women of her city. The Roman response? She was taken to Rome, not as a common prisoner, as a trophy. She paraded through the streets of Rome during the triumphal celebration, chained, while crowds celebrated. And then, she was sold to a Roman senator. The records stop there. Sophonisba disappears from history, like thousands of others. But her story represents something bigger. Jerusalem, 70 AD. Josephus, who was there, wrote the most detailed account we have of a Roman conquest, and he didn't hide anything. When the Roman legions broke through the walls of Jerusalem, after months of siege, the city was starving. People were already weak, desperate. Josephus estimates that about 100,000 Jews were captured. The majority? Women and children. He describes scenes that still make me pause today. Women trying to hide young daughters under rubble. Elderly women offering themselves in place of granddaughters. Mothers negotiating their own lives to spare children. And the Romans? They were systematic. They separated by age. The youngest had one destiny. The older ones, another. The children, a third. Josephus specifically mentions a group of women, about 700, who were selected for what he calls imperial service, sent to Rome, to noble houses. For history doesn't record what happened to them individually, but it records enough. Gaul, 52 BC. Julius Caesar himself wrote about his conquests in Gaul in Commentaries on the Gallic War. And here's something fascinating. Caesar was honest about what he did. He didn't hide it, didn't soften it. He literally wrote, after the conquest of Avaricum, about 40,000 inhabitants were captured. Of these, 20,000 were women. They were distributed among the legions as reward for service rendered. Distributed among the legions as reward. Let that sink in. The conqueror himself writing this as if it were normal, administrative, part of the job. But there's a name that survived from this period. Velida. Not a victim, but a leader. Velida was a Germanic priestess who led resistance against Rome. And when she was finally captured, her fate was unique. She was taken to Rome, but not as a common prisoner, as a curiosity, exhibited, a tamed, sacred barbarian by Rome. Statius, a Roman poet, mentions her in one of his texts years after capture. Velida was still alive, living in Rome, but not as a priestess, as imperial property. Britannia, 60 AD. And now, the story that impacted me the most. Boudica. Everyone knows Boudica, the warrior queen who rebelled against Rome, but few know why she rebelled. Tacitus tells the complete story, and it's brutal. When Boudica's husband died, Roman officers came to collect kingdom debts. Boudica refused. As punishment, Tacitus writes that Boudica was publicly flogged. Her 2 daughters, whose names we'll never know, were violated by Roman soldiers, not in secret, publicly, as a demonstration of power. And here's the most important detail. This wasn't a crime in the Roman view. It was correction, legal punishment for disobedience. Boudica led the biggest revolt Rome ever faced in Britannia, massacred an entire legion, burned ancient London to its foundations. But in the end, she lost. And when she lost, she committed suicide because she knew the fate of women captured by Rome. She knew exactly what would happen. And her daughters? History doesn't record, like so many others. So why don't we learn this in school? Why do documentaries rarely mention it? Why does the popular narrative about Rome focus on roads, aqueducts, and laws, but silence this? The answer is more complex than you imagine. First, the Romans themselves manipulated the narrative. Roman historians, men like Livy, who wrote the official history of Rome, had a goal: to glorify the empire, to show Rome as civilizing, as a force for good. And you know how they did this? Selective omission. They mentioned conquests, celebrated victories, but the darkest details, they were softened, transformed into euphemisms. Women were captured. Prisoners were distributed. The city was pacified. But when historians of conquered peoples wrote, like Josephus about Jerusalem, the story was very, very different. And here's something fascinating. There are Roman texts that were edited over the centuries. Monastery copyists working in monasteries literally removed passages considered inappropriate. Passages about extreme violence, about treatment of women, about practices that didn't fit the narrative of civilized Rome. And we know this because sometimes we find ancient versions, fragments on Egyptian papyrus, stone inscriptions that contain passages that don't exist in official medieval versions. Second, the modern academic structure itself has difficulty with this. Historians debate intensely. How do you teach about Rome? How do you balance the positive civilizational impact, and it was real, laws, engineering, philosophy, with the brutal human cost? Many choose to focus on the positive, mention the negative in passing. But that's not historical honesty. It's narrative choice. And third, and perhaps most important, we, as a modern civilization, inherited the Roman view of history. Our laws are based on Roman law. Our architecture is inspired by Rome. Our concept of empire comes from Rome. And it's uncomfortable to admit that the foundation of Western civilization was built on the systematic suffering of millions. It's easier to focus on the roads that connected the empire than on the chained people who built them. It's easier to admire the Colosseum than to think about the slaves who served the gladiators. It's easier to celebrate Julius Caesar than to read his own words about distributing conquered women. But truth doesn't disappear because we choose not to look at it.
And here we arrive at the point that completely changed my perspective on ancient history. Rome wasn't civilized. Rome was efficient. There's a fundamental difference between these two things, and it's a difference that most people never consider. Civilization implies values, respect for human dignity, systems that protect the vulnerable. Efficiency, it's just functionality, achieving objectives regardless of human cost. And when you understand this, when you really absorb this difference, you begin to see the Roman Empire in a completely new way. Rome had incredible systems, aqueducts that still work 2,000 years later, roads that defined trade routes for millennia, laws that form the basis of modern legal systems. But all of it was built on a domination machine that didn't see most human beings as human. And here's the reflection that bothers me most. How many of our modern structures, how many of our civilized systems still work like this? Efficient, functional, but built on the invisibilization of human suffering. I'm not making anachronistic moral judgments. Rome was a product of its time. Its values were different from ours. But are they that different? When we study Rome, we're not just studying the past, we're studying the DNA of Western civilization. The thought patterns, the power structures, the way societies decide who has value and who doesn't. And the women of the conquered cities, these millions of nameless, voiceless people without their own historical record, they show us something fundamental. They show us the real cost of empire, not measured in gold or territory, but in shattered lives, in erased identities, in suffering that was never accounted for in history books. And maybe the most important question isn't, how could Rome do this? The question is, what are we choosing not to see in our own time? So, what did we learn today? We learned that Rome wasn't simply good or bad. It was a system, a machine perfectly calibrated to dominate, absorb, and perpetuate power. And within this machine, women from conquered peoples weren't secondary details of history. They were central pieces of a domination strategy that worked for centuries. Each woman forced to abandon her identity broke not just an individual life, but an entire social network, an entire family structure, an entire future generation that would be born already disconnected from its roots. Rome knew this and used it deliberately. But here's something we need to understand. These women weren't just passive victims. Many resisted. Many found ways to preserve identities. Many transmitted stories, traditions, memories to children born in captivity.
And these silent resistances, these small invisible victories against the imperial machine, are part of the reason why, when Rome finally fell, the cultures it tried to destroy resurfaced. Gaul became France, Hispania became Spain, Britannia became England. Rome tried to erase identities, but identities survived. In languages, in customs, in stories passed from mother to daughter through generations. And this teaches us something profound about human resilience. You can destroy cities, you can burn temples, you can break armies, but identity lives in people. And as long as people survive, identity survives. Today, when we walk through Roman ruins, the Colosseum, the Forum, the aqueducts, we look with admiration. And we should. They're impressive achievements. But we also need to remember the stones we don't see, the invisible foundations, the millions of nameless people who made all that possible. We need to remember that every stone carried, every road built, every city erected was done by hands that didn't choose to be there. Rome built roads that connected continents, but these roads also took chained women to slave markets. Rome built laws that lasted millennia, but these laws classified half of humanity as property. Rome built a civilization, but built it on foundations of systematic suffering. And the question that remains, the question that each of us needs to answer for ourselves, when we look at the past, what do we choose to see? Only the greatness, or the greatness and the cost? Because both are true, both are real, and both matter. The women of the cities conquered by Rome had no choice in their stories, couldn't write their own accounts, couldn't leave monuments, but they were there, millions of them, over centuries. Their lives, their sufferings, their silent resistances, they were the untold story of the greatest empire the world has ever seen. And maybe telling this story now, 2,000 years later, is a way of finally giving them what Rome never gave, a voice. This was the truth about the treatment Roman soldiers gave to women in conquered cities, a truth more complex, darker, and more important than most history books will ever admit. And now, you know.
Look, making this video was one of the hardest things I've ever done on this channel. Weeks immersed in historical documents, confronting uncomfortable truths, trying to balance historical honesty with narrative responsibility. But you know why I did it? Because history matters. Real history matters. Not sanitized versions, not simplified narratives. The complete truth with all its complexity, all its discomfort, all its importance. And if you made it this far, if you stayed with me through this entire journey, you also believe that truth matters. So here's what I need from you now. First, if this video impacted you, if it made you think, if it showed you something you didn't know, leave your like. Seriously, YouTube's algorithm needs to know that deep and researched content like this is worth it. And each like shows me I should keep making videos like this. Second, leave a comment. Tell me, what shocked you most about this story? Had you ever heard about this side of Rome? What other obscure aspects of history do you want me to investigate? I read all the comments, and many of my next videos come directly from your suggestions. Third, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because in the next videos, I'm going to bring more historical truths that nobody has the courage to tell. I'm already researching similar practices in other empires, and I guarantee it will be even more impactful. And look, I know this type of content isn't easy to watch. It's not comfortable. It's not the kind of thing you share at breakfast. But it's important, because history isn't just about celebrating greatness. It's about completely understanding how we got to where we are. The good, the bad, and the absolutely disturbing. Thank you for having the courage to face this truth with me. Thank you for valuing real knowledge. And thank you for being part of this community that isn't afraid to look history in the eyes, even when history looks back.
Until the next video. And remember, truth doesn't need to be comfortable to be important.